Hello friends and welcome back to House of Props. Today is another Lord of the Rings themed build. I'm going to show you how I made this 5-foot long Uruk-Hai Berserker sword that we saw in the Two Towers. I've used a few different techniques for this one, so let's get started and see how they turn out. Alright, let's dive right in. To start, I cut the blade 1 pieces out of 10mm foam. In this case, I'm using floor mats since they're pretty cheap. Now the middle piece, you want to make sure you cut out the channel for the support that is indicated in the template, and then the middle can be glued to the bottom piece with contact cement. Next, take a Dremel with a sanding drum and carve some grooves into the bottom piece and the top piece. You don't want to carve too deep or it will screw up the bevel on the blade, so check your fit with your support periodically. You want the pieces to fit together around the support without creating a bending or warping effect. While I continue carving the channel, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe if you haven't already, and go ahead and click the notification bell so you can be notified when the next Lord of the Rings project is released. For the support, I'm using a 54.5 inch long piece of 1/2 inch conduit. Conduit is my new favorite support. It is relatively light, provides better support, and doesn't flex like PVC, plus the price isn't that different than PVC pipe. To make sure the support is secure in the blade, I'm applying a bead of E6000 to the bottom. When this dries, it will keep the support from sliding inside the sword. Then the conduit can be placed inside the groove and the top piece can be attached with contact cement. I drew a line down the center on the top and bottom to serve as guides for beveling, and I also added some in the center down the sides as well. They will help keep me on track when we start cutting away the foam. Now I'm leaving the blade 2 piece off for now because it will make beveling the 2 pieces easier if they're separated, but potentially you could attach them and still cut away the foam. To bevel the blade, I'm using a meat carver I got from the thrift store. I can line up with the guidelines and the carver will slice through the foam as if it were butter. If you don't have access to a meat carver, you can still do the step with a very sharp utility knife. I failed to mention, Blade 2 is created by cutting out 3 pieces of 10mm foam and gluing them together. The bevel on this piece is a little tricky, but the lines are indicated on the template and the foam can be carved the same as the other blade section. With the beveling complete, the blade pieces can be glued to each other with contact cement. If the pieces don't line up perfectly, don't worry about it, the next step will take care of that. Next, I took my rotary tool and sanding drum and smoothed off the connection area. The tool can also be used to refine the bevel and get rid of any spots that might be a little uneven. The handguard is created by cutting the template out of 3 pieces of 6mm foam and gluing them together with contact cement. The center hole was cut out and the piece can be slid onto the conduit support. To attach the handguard to the blade, I'm going to use CA glue. Just make sure the blade is centered and aligned when you press the handguard onto the glue, because that's the one thing with CA glue. It's difficult to back up and repeat any steps if you make a mistake. Next, the 2 grip pieces are cut out of 10mm foam and the top edges of each are trimmed to 45-degree angles. And on the inside of each piece, a groove is carved to allow space for the support. The first piece I secure onto the conduit with a bead of CA glue. Then the second piece can be glued on top with contact cement. You want to make sure these pieces are as tight as possible against the handguard so there isn't any gap and it looks like one solid piece of metal. Once all the pieces are attached to each other, go ahead and use the heat gun to heat seal the foam. Next, take the 2" by 44" piece of 2mm foam that will function as our leather wrapping and glue this around the grip. You can use contact cement for this step if you like, but I'm using CA glue because the stripping only needs to be attached in several spots. The piece isn't meant to completely cover the grip, it's just meant to look like a piece of leather that was quickly found and wrapped around the sword while it was in the forges of Isengard. Now, to give the wrapping some texture, heat the foam with the heat gun, and while it's still warm, use a crumpled up piece of aluminum foil to press into the surface. This will give you a subtle texture that resembles leather dimpling. While the foam is still warm, I use the cap on a ballpoint pen to create 2 circular dents on each end of the wrapping. These will be made to look like nail heads or tacks holding the leather in place. To give the blade some texture, I'm going to use this quick seal, because if you look at this image of the sword that comes with the Prime Studio statuette, the blade isn't a finely finished blade. So squeeze out some of the quick seal and add a little bit of water with a brush. You don't want to add too much because the putty will quickly become fluid and not hold its texture, so add a little bit at a time until you get a consistency like a very smooth peanut butter. Next, I use a palette knife to smear this across the surface of the blade, just like you're putting peanut butter on some toast. Then take the brush and pounce the surface so that you hide the smear marks and you get a dimpled texture. You can see here how the surface texture is varied and how the quick seal hides the meat carver and sanding marks on the surface of the foam. When the blade is completely coated and thoroughly dried, the entire sword can be covered with Plasti-Dip. As I've said in my other videos, I usually apply 2 to 3 coats on foam projects, and on this one I used 3 just to make sure that the texture on the blade was completely covered, and since I used 3 coats, I let the sword cure overnight to make sure everything is completely dry before proceeding. The next day I based all the metal surfaces with some charcoal gray. For a blade like this, it's best to start with a darker color but not black. If we started with black, the paint job would end up looking dull and flat. The grip and the handguard are also based with the charcoal gray. The leather wrapping can be based with some burnt umber. I'm beginning with this dark brown in order to end up with a really worn, aged leather look. Next, I'm using this metallic tin. I take a paper towel and dab it into the paint, then I wipe the surface of the metal with the paper towel. The paint will catch on the texture and the recessed areas will remain the charcoal color. I'm using this metallic tin for this project because it is a few shades darker than the metallic silver I've used in previous builds. The same tin color can be pounced onto the handguard and metal grip. Then using a small round brush, I paint the tack heads in the leather wrapping. Next, I took some burnt sienna, mixed in some raw umber, and thinned the mixture with a little water, and then brushed this onto the leather wrapping. Then, if you take a paper towel and pounce the wet surface, you will start to create the dimpling effect that happens with leather as it ages. Then the same process is repeated with some crimson mixed with some burnt umber, except this time the paint is applied sporadically across the surface before it is pounced with the paper towel. Then a black wash is applied to all the metal surfaces and then heavily pounced with a paper towel. This will leave a lot of the wash in the recesses and pop out some of the metallic surface, but it will also help tone down the tin and make it look more like steel. Then some thinned black, but not as thin as the wash, can be applied to the wrapping around the edges and in the crevices. To blend this, I'm using Q-tips so that the effect is different from what we've been getting with the paper towel. You can use the paper towel slightly, but not as heavily as before, because by varying the blending and the texturing of the paint, you can create more visual depth in your paint job. The final paint step was to thin some burnt umber and brush this in spots on the blade. Pounce it out with a paper towel and the brown will vary the surface of the blade so it appears to have more realism about it than if it were simply gray, black, and tin. The entire blade doesn't need to be coated with umber, but adding a few spots will make a huge difference. And there you have it, a 5-foot long Uruk-Hai Berserker sword from the Battle of Helm's Deep. We get to see these swords in the two towers when the ladders are being raised against the walls and the first wave of Uruks are popping up over the edge. I can only imagine the sight of a 7-foot tall Uruk coming at you with one of these things in its hand. Talk about frightening. And I'm really happy with the way that the surface turned out. I think I'm going to continue to use this quick seal technique on other projects because I really like the finish that it gives. And by using the conduit as the support instead of the PVC, the sword's got a little bit more heft to it, but it's not really that noticeable. And the best thing is that there's still enough foam around that metal support so that if you're using this in a LARPing campaign or something like that, you're not going to damage your friends with it. It's still very safe to use. So I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did and you would like to make one of these swords for yourself, you can find a link to the template in the below description. And please, in the comments, let me know what other projects from Lord of the Rings that you'd like to see me make, because, you know, it's obviously I'm a fan of it, and it's going to continue to be a part of this channel. Please give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to House of Props. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.